Medina, 627. A city under siege by 10,000 warriors, the defenders merely 3,000, and between them stood a simple trench that would determine the fate of Islam itself. Picture this: a small community of believers, vastly outnumbered, their backs against the wall, the air thick with tension as the massive coalition army camps on the horizon. Every man, woman, and child in Medina knows what hangs in the balance: their very survival. This is the tale of brilliant strategy, shocking betrayal, and a victory that defied all odds. A story that would echo through the centuries and change the course of history forever. After years of persecution in Mecca, the Muslims had found sanctuary in Medina, but their enemies had long memories. The Arab and Jewish tribes united with a single purpose: to exterminate the Muslims once and for all. It was the largest coalition ever assembled in Arabia, and Medina stood alone. What the invaders didn't account for was the ingenuity of Prophet Muhammad. Inspired by his Persian companion Salman, he ordered something unprecedented in Arabian warfare: a massive trench to encircle the vulnerable parts of the city. For the charging cavalry of the coalition, accustomed to swift desert battles, this simple defense would prove baffling. As the siege dragged on, food dwindled to dangerous levels. Inside the city, whispers of treachery grew. The Jewish tribe of Banu Kuriza, who had pledged to defend the city alongside the Muslims, was secretly negotiating with the enemy, a knife in the back that could spell doom for everyone within the walls. For 15 grueling days, the defenders held their position, shivering in the bitter cold of the unexpected winter winds, their stomachs empty, their determination unwavering. They watched as enemy riders repeatedly attempted to leap across the trench, only to fall short or be driven back by volleys of arrows. If you love history and want to uncover the secrets of great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and never miss an episode. What makes a siege truly terrifying isn't just the enemy at your gates, it's the enemy within your walls. As the massive coalition army approached Medina, a shadow of treachery was growing inside the city itself. The Banu Kuriza, one of the 3 major Jewish tribes of Medina, had sworn a pact of mutual defense with the Muslims. They occupied a strategic quarter in the southern part of the city, an area that, if breached, would expose the entire Muslim community to slaughter. When danger approached, the Muslims trusted them to hold their position. That trust was about to be shattered. Huyai ibn Akhtab, a leader from the exiled Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir and a master manipulator, slipped into Medina under cover of darkness. He made his way to the fortress of Ka'b ibn Asad, the chief of Banu Kuriza. At first, Ka'b refused to even open his doors. He knew exactly why Huyai had come. "Leave me be," Ka'b shouted through the barred gate. "We have a treaty with Muhammad, and I have seen nothing from him but loyalty and truth." But Huyai was persistent. Hour after hour, he whispered promises of glory and vengeance. 10,000 warriors stand ready to annihilate Muhammad forever. This is your chance to reclaim your rightful place in this land. Eventually, Ka'b's resolve crumbled. The gates opened, and with that simple action, the fate of hundreds hung in the balance. Word of this betrayal reached Muhammad through his intelligence network. Imagine the weight of this revelation. While facing an overwhelming force from outside, now the Muslims would have to watch their backs as well. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Banu Kuriza controlled over 700 fighting men, and their fortresses overlooked the unprotected rear of the Muslim position. Their plan was diabolical in its simplicity. When the coalition forces would launch their main assault across the trench, the Banu Kuriza would strike from behind, catching the defenders in a deadly pincer movement. Muhammad immediately dispatched a small contingent led by his close companions to verify the rumors. "Approach them casually," he instructed. "If they remain loyal, proclaim it publicly. If they have betrayed us, signal me discreetly." When the contingent returned, their faces told the story before their words could. The betrayal was real. In a masterful display of leadership, Muhammad kept this devastating news from spreading panic among the general population. Instead, he increased patrols in the vulnerable southern quarter and reinforced it with his most trusted fighters. Meanwhile, he employed a brilliant psychological tactic. He sent a trusted negotiator to sow discord between the coalition and their new allies, planting seeds of doubt about each other's commitment. This betrayal, a knife poised at the back of Medina, would have broken lesser communities. But in this moment of existential threat, it only strengthened the resolve of the Muslims to survive, no matter the odds. Warfare in 7th century Arabia followed predictable patterns. Swift cavalry charges across the desert, hand-to-hand combat with swords and spears, and raids that relied on speed and surprise. For generations, this was the only way tribes knew how to fight. But everything was about to change. As the massive coalition army approached Medina, Prophet Muhammad gathered his companions for a war council. The situation appeared hopeless. How could 3,000 defenders possibly withstand an army more than 3 times their size? Their enemies had over 600 horsemen, while the Muslims had just a handful of horses. It was then that Salman the Persian stepped forward with an idea that would transform Arabian warfare forever. In Persia, Salman explained, when we are outnumbered, we dig a trench around our position, too wide for horses to leap, too deep for men to easily cross. The room fell silent. This was entirely foreign to Arabian military thinking. Trenches, defensive warfare. These concepts had never been applied in the harsh desert environment of Arabia, where mobility and attacking prowess were the measures of military might. Muhammad's eyes lit up. "Show me," he said. And so began one of the most remarkable engineering projects of early Islamic history. With time running short and the enemy closing in, every able-bodied Muslim, including Muhammad himself, grabbed shovels and picks. The Prophet assigned sections 10 cubits long to groups of 10 men each. For 6 days straight, they dug through the rocky soil of Medina's northern plain. What makes this story even more extraordinary is that they were digging in the midst of a severe food shortage. Many tied stones to their stomachs to ease the pain of hunger. Muhammad worked alongside his men, his hands blistered and his back covered in dust. When the diggers hit an enormous boulder they couldn't break, Muhammad himself took a pickaxe, struck it, and according to eyewitnesses, the rock shattered with a spark that momentarily illuminated all of Medina. The trench wasn't a simple ditch. It was carefully designed to take advantage of Medina's natural geography. The southern side of the city was protected by dense date palm groves, too thick for cavalry to navigate. The eastern and western flanks were shielded by volcanic rocks and buildings. This left only the northern plain exposed, and that's precisely where the Muslims focused their digging efforts. When the coalition forces finally arrived, led by the wealthy Meccan leader Abu Sufyan, they were completely bewildered. There, stretching across their path, was a barrier they had never encountered in warfare before, a trench nearly 5 miles long, 9 feet wide, and 7 feet deep. Abu Sufyan rode along the edge, searching desperately for a crossing point. His prized horse, a magnificent white stallion he believed brought him victory in battle, a true warrior's talisman, grew agitated at the strange obstacle. As Abu Sufyan leaned forward to peer into the trench, trying to gauge its depth, his horse reared unexpectedly. He lost his balance and nearly tumbled into the ditch himself, barely catching himself on the reins, while his precious stallion bolted away in panic, never to be recovered. The mighty Meccan leader was forced to continue the siege on a replacement horse, a black mare that he considered an ill omen. His warriors whispered that losing his victory talisman was a terrible sign. "What kind of warfare is this?" the Bedouin warriors complained. "This is not how Arabs fight. They hide behind a ditch rather than meeting us honorably on the battlefield." The trench completely disrupted their battle plans. Cavalry charges, the backbone of Arabian warfare, were rendered useless. The coalition was forced into a siege they were neither equipped nor prepared for. Their fighters were desert nomads used to quick, decisive battles, not the patient waiting game that siege warfare demanded. This simple innovation, transferring a Persian military tactic to the Arabian context, had transformed what should have been a swift massacre into a prolonged stalemate that would ultimately favor the defenders of Medina. As days turned into weeks, the true horror of siege warfare began to unfold in Medina. For 15 excruciating days, the people of Medina endured what many would later describe as the most terrifying ordeal of their lives. Food supplies, already scarce before the siege, dwindled to almost nothing. Families were forced to survive on a handful of dates per day. Some resorted to boiling leather straps just to have something warm in their stomachs. Children cried from hunger pains that parents could do nothing to ease. The Prophet Muhammad himself tied stones against his belly to suppress the gnawing hunger, showing solidarity with even the poorest among his followers. One companion later recalled, "Our hunger was so severe that we would pick up a date that had fallen in the dirt, carefully wipe it clean, and consider it a blessing to eat." The coalition forces, growing frustrated with their inability to cross the trench, resorted to psychological warfare. Day and night, they launched volleys of arrows into the city, forcing the defenders to remain constantly vigilant. Sleep became a luxury few could afford. Mothers kept their children indoors, away from the deadly rain of arrows that occasionally found marks among the civilian population. The Confederate army wasn't just sitting idle. Elite warriors continually probed the trench for weaknesses. One section, narrower than the rest, became the focus of repeated crossing attempts. A small band of Meccan champions, including the feared warrior Amr ibn Abd Wud, managed to leap across on horseback and challenge the Muslims to single combat. The aging Amr, covered in scars from countless battles, taunted the defenders mercilessly until Ali, the Prophet's cousin, stepped forward to face him in what would become one of the most celebrated duels in Islamic history. The spectacle left both armies holding their breath as the young Ali faced the veteran warrior who had fought battles before Ali was even born. When Ali emerged victorious, the remaining Meccan champions retreated hastily back across the trench, further demoralizing the coalition forces. But just when the people of Medina thought things couldn't get worse, nature itself seemed to turn against them. An unseasonable cold front swept through the Arabian Peninsula. Bitter winds howled through Medina's streets, extinguishing cooking fires and making the nights unbearable. For desert dwellers accustomed to heat, this sudden cold was particularly devastating. Mothers wrapped their children in every scrap of fabric they could find. The sick and elderly suffered terribly. The wind was so fierce it ripped through the makeshift shelters of both armies. Inside Medina, families huddled together for warmth, their hunger pains intensified by the cold. For the coalition army, the situation was even worse. Their camp on the exposed plains offered little protection from the elements. Their tents collapsed, their campfires wouldn't stay lit, and their supplies were scattered by the howling gales. The proud Bedouin warriors, who had arrived expecting a quick and glorious victory, now found themselves shivering in the mud, wondering if this campaign was cursed. Abu Sufyan, still bitter about losing his prized horse, stalked through his wind-ravaged camp with growing desperation. His coalition was beginning to fracture. The various tribes, initially united in their hatred of Muhammad, now blamed each other for their misery. Whispers spread that perhaps they had angered the desert gods by allying with the Meccans against their own kinsmen. Inside the city, Muhammad moved constantly among his people, offering encouragement, sharing in their suffering, and reminding them of the victories of the past when they had overcome seemingly impossible odds. His calm presence became an anchor for many who might otherwise have given in to despair. A particularly moving moment came when a young girl offered the Prophet her last 2 dates. Without hesitation, he accepted one, but insisted she eat the other. showing that even in the depths of crisis, sharing and compassion remained central to their community's values. As the siege dragged on, both sides wondered how much longer they could endure. The trench had turned what should have been a swift battle into a grueling test of will. Who would break first? Did you know that the trench was almost 5 kilometers long? That's right, the Muslims dug a defensive barrier equivalent to 31 modern football fields laid end to end, all in just 6 days while starving. If you're enjoying this incredible story of survival against all odds, like this video, share it with friends who love history, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives. And I'm curious, what would you do if you were surrounded by an army 3 times larger than your own? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. On the 15th night of the siege, as the defenders of Medina huddled in their homes with empty stomachs and dwindling hope, the winds that had been tormenting both armies suddenly transformed into something much more ferocious. What began as a cold front became a full-blown desert storm of biblical proportions. The night was pitch black, without moon or stars to guide anyone. The temperature plummeted further, bringing with it not just wind, but a stinging, biting cold that cut through cloth and leather alike. Muhammad gathered his closest companions and prayed through the night, his voice barely audible above the howling gale. Outside the city walls, in the sprawling camp of the coalition forces, the storm unleashed its full fury. Eyewitnesses later described it as if the desert itself had risen against the invaders. The wind didn't just blow. It screamed, it tore, it punished. Imagine the scene. 10,000 warriors from various tribes, already exhausted by 2 weeks of fruitless siege, their morale crumbling, suddenly found themselves in the middle of a nightmare. Their tents, those that hadn't already collapsed from the earlier winds, were now ripped from the ground and sent cartwheeling across the desert. Cooking pots overturned, spilling precious food into the sand. Campfires were extinguished instantly, plunging the entire camp into terrifying darkness. The coalition's horses, already nervous from the prolonged and unusual battle conditions, broke free from their tethers and bolted in panic. Hundreds of prized Arabian steeds, the backbone of their military might, scattered in all directions, many never to be recovered. Most frightening of all were the sounds. The Arabs, deeply superstitious about desert spirits, heard in the wind what they believed to be the voices of jinns, supernatural beings, and the angry roars of their ancestral gods. Some swore they could hear armies of invisible warriors surrounding them in the darkness, their weapons clanging, their war cries carried on the wind. One Bedouin warrior later described it. It was as if 1,000 invisible hands were tearing at my clothes, pushing me away from Medina. The sand blinded us. The cold froze our hands so we couldn't hold our weapons, and then came the voices. I have fought in 20 battles, but never have I known such fear. Inside his command tent, which was barely standing, Abu Sufyan made a desperate decision. Ancient Arabian military wisdom held that no army could maintain a siege through such conditions. To continue would invite complete disaster. As leader of the coalition, he called his captains together, their faces barely visible in the darkness. "This is no natural storm," one tribal chief insisted. "The God of Muhammad has sent his armies against us." Another pointed out that their supplies were critically low, many of their horses gone, and the men were speaking of evil omens. Continuing the siege had become impossible. Here's a fascinating detail few people know. Moments before Abu Sufyan gave the order to retreat, he performed a traditional pagan ritual, casting divination arrows to determine whether they should stay or go. All 3 arrows pointed toward retreat, an unprecedented, unanimous result that shook even this experienced warrior to his core. Abu Sufyan stood up, his decision made. "Break camp," he ordered. "We march for Mecca at first light." But many warriors didn't wait until dawn. Throughout that terrifying night, hundreds simply gathered what they could carry and slipped away into the darkness. By morning, what had been the largest military force ever assembled in Arabia had disintegrated. When dawn finally broke, the Muslims cautiously peered over their defenses, expecting another day of siege. Instead, they witnessed an extraordinary sight. The enemy camp was in ruins, abandoned, with only a few stragglers hastily gathering their belongings. The mighty coalition that had threatened to annihilate Islam had been scattered to the winds, literally. Was this merely a stroke of meteorological fortune, a timely desert storm that happened to break a deadlocked military situation? Or was it, as many Muslims firmly believed, divine intervention, the hand of God protecting the fledgling religious community when all human efforts had reached their limit? The Quran would later describe it. O you who believe, remember Allah's favor to you when armies came against you, and we sent against them a wind and forces that you could not see. Day, those invisible forces, whether understood as angels, as many believers interpreted it, or as the psychological impact of the storm on an already fragile coalition, had accomplished what the defenders of Medina could not have achieved through force of arms alone. Even some of the coalition fighters, upon returning to their tribes, spread stories of supernatural intervention. One Meccan warrior reportedly said, "I have fought against many men, but I will not fight against the heavens." This dramatic conclusion to the Battle of the Trench would forever be remembered as one of the most consequential moments in early Islamic history. A turning point when the very survival of the new faith hung in the balance, only to be secured by a storm that came precisely when it was needed most. With the coalition army scattered and the immediate danger past, the people of Medina barely had time to celebrate their unexpected victory. A serious problem remained within their walls, the Banu Kuriza tribe, whose planned betrayal could have destroyed everything. Immediately after the retreat of the coalition forces, Muhammad turned his attention to this internal threat. The Muslims, still wearing their armor, marched to the fortresses of the Banu Kuriza in the southern quarter of the city. What followed would become one of the most controversial episodes in early Islamic history. The Banu Kuriza, seeing their allies flee and now facing the consequences of their betrayal, barricaded themselves in their fortresses. They had gambled everything on a coalition victory and lost. Now, they found themselves alone, facing a community they had planned to stab in the back at its most vulnerable moment. For 25 days, the Muslims besieged these fortresses. Unlike the coalition army that had just fled, the defenders of Medina had become experts in the patience required for siege warfare. They simply surrounded the fortresses and waited. Inside, the situation quickly grew desperate. Ka'b ibn Asad, the chief who had broken the treaty with Muhammad, offered his people three options: convert to Islam and be spared, kill their own women and children, then fight to the death, or launch a surprise attack on the Sabbath when the Muslims might not expect it. His tribe rejected all three proposals. Instead, they pinned their hopes on negotiation. They asked for Abu Lubaba, a Muslim who had been friendly with them before the betrayal, to advise them. When they asked him what would happen if they surrendered, he drew his hand across his throat, a gesture that he immediately regretted as a betrayal of Muhammad's confidence. So great was his remorse that he tied himself to a pillar in Muhammad's mosque, vowing to remain there until he was forgiven. After nearly a month of siege, with no hope of rescue and their supplies dwindling, the Banu Kuriza finally surrendered unconditionally. Now came the matter of their judgment. In a remarkable decision that reveals much about the political realities of the time, Muhammad appointed Sa'd ibn Mu'ad, the leader of the al-Ahzab tribe, to decide their fate. This was strategic. The Awas had been traditional allies of the Banu Kuriza before Islam. If anyone would show them mercy, it would be Sa'd. What many don't realize is that Sa'd was suffering from a severe battle wound that would ultimately prove fatal. In tremendous pain and aware he was dying, he was carried to the judgment place on a stretcher. Sa'd pronounced his verdict based on the Torah itself. the Jewish law that the Banu Kuriza claimed to follow. The fighting men would be executed, while women and children would be spared and taken into captivity. The judgment shocked many, including members of the AWS tribe who had expected leniency. But Sa'd reminded them of the magnitude of the betrayal. Had the Banu Kuriza's plan succeeded, the entire community of Medina, including women and children, would have been slaughtered or enslaved. The numbers involved in this incident have been debated by historians for centuries. Some early sources claim that hundreds of men were executed, while more recent scholarly analysis suggests the numbers were likely much smaller, perhaps between 70 and 100 fighting men. What's crucial to understand is the context of 7th century Arabian warfare. Treason during wartime was universally punished by death throughout the ancient world. The Romans, Persians, and Byzantines all employed similar or harsher punishments for comparable offenses. The laws of war in pre-Islamic Arabia were brutally straightforward. The victors determined the fate of the vanquished, and mercy was a rare commodity. The women and children of the Banu Kuriza were distributed among Muslim households, many eventually gaining their freedom through conversion or manumission. Some of the children were raised in Muslim homes and later became prominent members of the community. One particularly poignant story involves a woman named Raihana. Captured after the surrender, she initially refused to convert to Islam. Muhammad offered to marry her if she accepted Islam, but she declined. He respected her decision and kept her as a concubine, according to the customs of the time. Later, however, she did convert of her own free will, and some accounts suggest she eventually became one of his wives. The fate of the Banu Kuriza serves as a stark reminder of the harsh realities of ancient warfare and the consequences of betrayal in a time when survival hung by the thinnest of threads. It remains one of the most difficult episodes for modern audiences to reconcile with the otherwise merciful character attributed to Muhammad in Islamic tradition. What's often overlooked is that this judgment came after a series of betrayals. The Banu Kuriza's action was the third such betrayal by Jewish tribes in Medina, following earlier incidents with the Banu Kainuka and Banu Nadir tribes, who had been exiled rather than executed after their transgressions. In the eyes of 7th century observers, the escalating punishment reflected the escalating danger each betrayal had posed to the survival of the entire community. The aftermath of the Banu Kuriza incident permanently altered the demographic and political landscape of Medina. With their elimination, the city became more religiously homogeneous, accelerating its transformation into the first Islamic state. The hard lessons of betrayal and survival would shape the young community's policies and attitudes for generations to come. The Battle of the Trench stands as one of history's most remarkable turning points, a moment when the entire trajectory of religious history hung in the balance. Had those 10,000 coalition warriors broken through the defenses of Medina, Islam might have been extinguished in its infancy, remembered today as nothing more than a brief, failed movement in the deserts of Arabia. Instead, this improbable victory transformed everything. Within just 3 years of surviving the siege, Muhammad would return to Mecca not as an exile, but as a conqueror. Within a decade of his death, his followers would defeat the mighty Persian Empire and challenge the Byzantine Romans. And within a century, the Islamic civilization would stretch from Spain to India, creating one of the world's greatest cultural and intellectual golden ages. All of this, the spread of Islam across 3 continents, the preservation of ancient Greek knowledge that would later help spark the European Renaissance, the development of algebra, advances in medicine, astronomy, and architecture, all might never have happened if not for a simple trench dug in the rocky soil of Medina. The battle teaches us timeless lessons about innovation in the face of overwhelming odds. The Muslims didn't win through superior numbers or weapons, but through strategic thinking that broke with convention. Salman the Persian's foreign idea, so obvious in hindsight, yet revolutionary in its context, reminds us that sometimes the most powerful solutions come from outside our traditional ways of thinking. It also shows us the crucial importance of leadership during crisis. Throughout the ordeal, Muhammad moved among his people, sharing their hunger, working alongside them in digging, and maintaining morale when surrender must have seemed the only rational option. When the storm finally came and scattered their enemies, many saw divine intervention. But this miracle found fertile ground in a community that had already shown extraordinary resilience. Perhaps most fascinating is how this battle reflects the fragility of historical outcomes. We often look back at history as inevitable, as if things could only have happened exactly as they did. But the Battle of the Trench reminds us that history often balances on a knife's edge. A different decision here, a change in weather there, and our entire world might look unrecognizably different today. One remarkable legacy of this battle persists in military history. The trench warfare that seemed so alien to the Arabs in 627 would become the dominant mode of combat in World War I, nearly 13 centuries later. Soldiers on the Western Front, huddled in muddy trenches under artillery fire, were unknowingly echoing a defensive strategy first employed by a small religious community fighting for its survival in ancient Arabia. For the Muslim community, the battle represented a profound spiritual validation. The Quran itself would commemorate this moment. O you who believe, remember Allah's favor upon you when armies came against you, and we sent against them a wind and forces that you could not see. Whether you see the outcome as divine providence or extraordinary human perseverance, or perhaps both working in tandem, the Battle of the Trench reminds us that history's course is determined not just by the powerful and numerous, but sometimes by the innovative, the determined, and the faithful. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most consequential yet underappreciated battles, please hit that like button and share this video with friends who appreciate how seemingly small moments can change the world forever. Subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more stories that reveal how our present was shaped by the past. From forgotten heroes to overlooked turning points, we're exploring the medieval world that laid the foundations for our own. What other pivotal historical moments would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that history isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the fragile, extraordinary chain of events that led to our world today.